Hi, Jessica Nadav, bringing you this week's Davar Torah on Parashat Shemot. So last week we finished the book of Parashat, the book of Genesis, and for a large part of that book we focused on our forefathers or leaders and the leaders who were chosen or selected, what qualities were required of them, and who was not chosen. This week we're going to start the second book of the Torah, the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, and immediately we go into the background of the greatest, the ultimate leader in history, Moshe Rabbeinu. In this case, we're given his history and his background before he was even born. We are told that a new king arose in Egypt who didn't know of Yosef. This king claimed to be concerned about the increase in the Israelite population. He claimed to be concerned how they could rise up against the Egyptian population, how could they could take over effectively. And in response, he imposed taxes on them and tried to afflict the people. But when the Israelites continued to thrive and to increase in population, he enslaved them and sentenced them to hard labor. He then went further and ordered the midwives who dealt with the Israelite women to kill all baby boys. The God-fearing midwives disobeyed him, so the Israelites kept multiplying. And we're told how Moshe was born, how after hiding him for 3 months, his mother puts him into a basket and puts him in by the edge of the Nile. And Paro's daughter sees him there and saves him and brings him up as a member of the palace, within Paro's palace. Moshe is always aware of who he is. And once grown up, he goes out to see how the suffering of his people. He saw an Egyptian striking an Israelite. And he saves the Israelites. He strikes the Egyptian, killing him, and hides him or in his body in the sand. The next day he sees 2 Israelites quarreling, and when he admonishes the aggressor tells him exactly that he saw exactly what happened the day before, and he saw what Moshe had done. Moshe, fearful, has to flee to Midian. There he rescues Yitro's daughters, whilst they attempt to give their flock water to drink from a well. He is taken to Yitro's home, and he marries one of the daughters, Sipporah, and he becomes a shepherd for his father-in-law. So whilst tending to Yitro's sheep one day, God appears to Moshe from within a bush, which is aflame but not burning. Which is funny because we always call it the episode of the burning bush. The bush was not burning. It was aflame but not burning. Hashem introduces himself, so to speak, to Moshe Rabbeinu and tells him he must go to Paro and demands that Paro let his people go. Moshe offers several objections and tries to convince Hashem to use someone else, send someone else. One of the objections is, why should the Israelites or even the Egyptians even listen to me? Hashem gives him various signs which he uses to convince them. And Hashem also warns him that he intends to harden Paro's heart so that he doesn't let his people go. Lastly, he tells Moshe, tell Paro, so said the Lord, this is a quote by the way, so said the Lord, Beni Bechori Israel, my firstborn is Israel. So I say to you, send my son so that he will worship me, but if you refuse to send him out, behold, I will slay your firstborn. Another one of Moshe's objections, we're going to come back to that quote by the way, but another one of Moshe's objections is that he is heavy of mouth and of speech. So Aharon, Moshe's brother, is appointed as Moshe's spokesperson, so to speak. And together they inform the elders of Israel that the time for the redemption has come, and they go to Paro, and as expected, Paro refuses to let the Israelites go. Not only that, he then intensifies their labor and their suffering. Moshe protests to Hashem, and Hashem promises, quote, now you will see what I shall do to Paro, for with a strong hand will he send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them from his land. And with that, the parasha ends. Okay, so that's the little summary. Now, there are a multitude of things to talk about here, as usual, but I want to try and focus on something that relates to our previous discussions from the book of Parashat, of Genesis. Before I start, though, I have to recommend a fantastic book called The Exodus You Almost Passed Over. In this week's parasha, we're fully introduced to a leader, our ultimate leader. And like Avraham Avinu, who sort of suddenly appeared in Lech Lecha without any background, without any any introduction. Here we have a full introduction to Moshe Rabbeinu. We know all about his background, but more importantly, more significantly, we have him in 3 different situations in which he fights for justice. In the first, he defends his Israelite brother against an Egyptian. In the second, he intervenes between 2 Israelites fighting. And in the third, he intervenes with random strangers, with these women who are being harassed and bullied at the well. He cares about people, no matter who they are. Doesn't matter if they're his brothers or not. He cares about people. We're also shown here that he's a very reluctant leader. He really wants Hashem to use someone else. So that's Moshe Rabbeinu. I have a whole shiur on Moshe Rabbeinu, which for another time. What I want to focus on today is what Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu about Bnei Israel being his Bechor. I read it to you before, being his firstborn. Rabbi Foreman points out that firstbornness, the idea of firstbornness, features quite heavily in the whole story of Exodus. The Exodus story tells us who we are as a nation, our past and our future. It tells us about our conception, our birth, and our destiny. As Rabbi Foreman says, quote, "The story is about what it means to be a firstborn nation." Now let's look at this a bit more further, because my immediate question when I saw that was, why would we want to be a firstborn nation? We've just spent the whole of Bereshit, or most of Bereshit, seeing how the firstborn doesn't get ahead, how the firstborn doesn't get chosen, how the firstborn never seems to be quite that worthy. So why would we even want to be the firstborn of the nations of the world? So Rabbi Foreman explains this beautifully. He suggests that the status of Bnei Israel as Bechor, or as firstborn, was not a given, but something that was a hope for Bnei Israel's destiny. That maybe it was something we had to earn. What Hashem is really telling Paro, says Rabbi Foreman, was that there would come a time, not in this week's parasha, but in the next couple of parashiot, when God would kill all of the firstborns of Egypt, except his own. If you chose on that night to become God's firstborn, if you became Hashem's Bechor, you were saved. So that act of, as we'll see in future parashat, that act of painting, of taking a Korban Pesach, of sacrificing the sacrificial lamb and painting its blood on the doorposts, was an act of choosing to be God's firstborn. It's an active choice. That's all very nice, but that doesn't answer my question, right? Why would we want to be a firstborn, given the track record so far that we've seen in Bereshit, right? We've seen that actually the firstborn doesn't usually get ahead. So Rabbi Foreman explains that a firstborn is there to close a generational gap between parents and children. How so? So children naturally want to emulate their parents. But how can they when they inhabit a completely different world? A child doesn't understand what the parent does all day, for example, at work. A child can't relate to that. So a parent might be doing wonderful things saving the world, 8 hours or 12 hours of the day. But the child doesn't understand that. The child doesn't see that. And this is where the idea of the firstborn comes in. And by the way, when I say firstborn, it doesn't mean someone who was born first, as we've seen in the book of Bereshit. It's not the person who is born first, but the person who takes on the mantle of, the role of being a firstborn. They adopt that role. A firstborn can take a parent's values and translate them into a children's world. The work done by the parent, the person in charge, in the outside world can be translated into equity or values in the siblings' world. So to give you an example, this happened with a friend's family, where their children were playing Monopoly. Not one of them would bankrupt the other siblings. Every time one child was about to get bankrupt, the other children would come in and lend them money. Those are the parents' values translated into the children's world. Or for example, when a parent is working late, or parents are working late, and the children decide, you know what, let's make it easy for mum and dad. When they come home, let supper be ready. And so they distribute their household chores so that one, lays a table, the other one peels the vegetables, the other one cooks, whatever. That is the parent taking the values of the children, the children taking the values of the parents, and translating it into the siblings' world and making sure that, for example, the little ones in the house don't get bullied by the older ones in the house, for example. The ethics of the parents and their values translates into the children's world at their level. And it is the child who adopts this role of firstborn, of Bechor, who becomes the bridge between the generations. Rabbi Foreman points out, in fact, that the word Bechor, which is spelt Bet Chaf Resh in Hebrew, provides us with a hint of this. So as we know, every Hebrew letter has a numerical value. For example, the word for father in Hebrew is Av, Aleph, Bet. Aleph is 1 and Bet is 2. So if we take the word for firstborn, Bechor, we'll see that the root of the word, Bet Chaf Resh, is comprised of 3 letters, whose numerical values are 2, 20 and 200. The progression of these letters indicates a relationship between them. A man starts out as just 1, but when he becomes a father, he's now 2. Hence the word for father is 1 leading up to 2, as a bridge towards the 2. And similarly, the word for the first of those children is Bechor, which is meant to be a transition figure that bridges the gap between the parent and the child. The word Bechor starts with a 2, of the letter Bet, which is the end of Av. So Av starts as 1, the Aleph of 1, converting into 2. Bechor starts with a 2, with that 2 from the father. That's the tail end of father, of Av. And becomes a bridge to all the other 2s, to the 20 and the 200, the expansion of the 2. In the entire Exodus story, Hashem is revealing himself as the creator of the world and the world's ultimate father. Bnei Israel are to be the firstborn that bridges the gap between the ultimate parent and all of his children in the world. It is for Bnei Israel to be the example and the means of acting out the ethics and the values of the ultimate parent. Hashem's ultimatum to Paro, to either allow his firstborn to go and serve him, or to lose his own firstborns, now seems to make a lot more sense. Hashem wanted to transmit his values to the world, to humankind. In order to do this, Hashem needs the services of a Bechor. If Paro denies Hashem the services of his Bechor, then Hashem will deprive Egypt of the services of their own Bechorim. How is Egypt going to transmit its own values from generation to generation without the benefit of its own child leaders, without the benefit of their own Bechorim? On the night that we're born as a nation, we took the step of choosing to be Hashem's Bechor, choosing of being Hashem's firstborn. We took an animal that the Egyptians worshipped, and we painted its blood on our doorsteps. As we finished off last week, we were all selected. We were all chosen. And now we know why. We are to be the Bechor of the world. We're to be the firstborn of the world, bridging the gap between Hashem and the rest of humankind, his values and the rest of humankind. Shabbat Shalom.